Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
All right, as we in the Southeast get prepared for an uninvited guest, Helene is coming, and in the South, we try to be polite with our uninvited guests, but she is definitely unwelcome. However, we are preparing for it, and it looks like we may have a Category 3 hurricane coming up into the armpit of Florida. And I say the armpit not as if to say that that area of Florida is bad. It just literally looks like the armpit of Florida, if you will, the crease, the fold. Anyway, as Helene approaches the Panama City, Destin, Fort Walton area with all that she's going to be bringing to bear in the next day or so, we're also preparing for what could be a Category 1 hurricane when it's in the middle of Georgia, and some heavy tropical winds as it goes through metro Atlanta and then heads up, we're assuming, up into Tennessee and Arkansas. So that's on our agenda. We got that to look forward to. We're also less than 50 days away from deciding who's going to be the next president of the United States, but I digress. A little bit later in the show, I'm going to have Representative Ruwa Romman on from Gwinnett County. She, of course, Palestinian American and the lone Palestinian American serving in the state legislature, and one of the few Palestinian Americans even serving in elected office in these United States. So I want to get a sense of where her mind is on not only the presidential race, but the situation in the Middle East. I've got some pointed questions to ask her about support she may or may not be getting from within the state Democratic Party. We know she had a hard time even bending ears at the DNC. Obviously did not get a speaking engagement at the convention. Lots to talk about. That'll be one that I imagine a conversation that even some hardcore Democrats who love listening to this show because they think I tend to be towing their line, maybe gritting their teeth for a good bit of that conversation, but it's one that we need to have, right? And hey, if you're new to listening to this show, you just kind of wandered onto it now that we're on Progressive Voices, weeknights, 7 to 8 p.m., or you just found America One Radio and you like listening to that show or that station and its lineup of liberal pundits and commentators, and you're like, well, who is this guy? Why is he rocking the boat? That tends to be how I am. Yeah, I readily admit I vote Democrat most of the time. I can't think of a Republican that I voted for in quite a while, to be honest with you. Mostly because I don't think as a Democrat I've ever been in a situation that I think a lot of Republicans are in right now, where ideology means a lot to me, and someone who has control of the nomination of my party does not espouse those values. We have that situation actually going on in Metro Atlanta with a nominee who snuck onto the ballot and is running for a congressional seat, despite the fact that she's not really a Democrat. And you know what? Come to think of it, I actually have the write-in candidate for that race who will be on the show tomorrow. Tracy Verhoeven will join me, so we'll talk about that tomorrow. I digress. My point is, yes, this show is policy discussion, punditry, commentary from a left-of-center point of view, but I'm also going to keep it real when I feel like my own party may not be doing what's best for the people or hanging on to its own ideological values. Now, it's on that note that I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here and speak about journalism. And I guess opinion columnists kind of sometimes count in that discussion because, believe it or not, there are some honest pundits who may deem themselves to be liberal or conservative, but honest in their conversation with the American public. See, I'd like to think that I'm kind of crafting myself into being something like that as well. A good example would be Brett Stevens at the New York Times, who was on Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday, and I'll get to that audio here in just a second. He wrote a piece a few days ago. When did this come out? Last week, as a matter of fact, on the 17th. So, okay, a little more. Yeah, 8 days ago. The headline, What Harris Must Do to Win Over Skeptics, in parentheses, he writes, like me. Brett Stevens is a bit of a conservative opinion writer with the New York Times, and he nitpicks a little bit about his situation, being that he knows he's not going to vote for Donald Trump. He's not as convinced that he's going to vote for Kamala Harris. And Stephanie Ruhle from MSNBC, who, by the way, will have Kamala Harris on in a sit-down here very soon, kind of took him to task, wondering, what's it going to take? You have a binary situation here, and what's the confusion? Here's a little bit of that back and forth.
It's not too much to ask Kamala, say, are you for a Palestinian state if Hamas is going to run that state?
Okay.
Yes or no?
And let's say you don't like her answer. Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
No, I'm not.
Kamala
I just said I'm not going to vote for her.
Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have two choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
I don't know.
So it's unclear to me how there could be an informed...
The problem that a lot of people have with Kamala is we don't know her answer to anything, okay?
But you know his answer to everything.
And that's why I would never vote for him, and people shouldn't vote for him. But people also are expected to have some idea of what the program is of the person you're supposed to vote for. You're just not supposed to say, well, you have to vote for Y because X is this, that, and the other. Let's find out a little bit more. And I don't think it's a lot to ask her to sit down for a real interview as opposed to a puff piece in which she describes like her feelings of growing up in Oakland with nice lawns.
Then I would just say to that, when you move to Nirvana, give me your real estate broker's number and I'll be your next door neighbor. We don't live there.
I mean, I feel like you're the dog we're trying to get in the car to go to the vet. You know.
We're going to put that palm on your head for the rest of the day.
I say that as one of your biggest fans. You know, I mean, I gobble up everything you write. I just don't understand how you get to this place, but okay, let's not badger.
No, actually, let's do a little bit. I can't help but wonder when people ask questions about who Kamala Harris is going to sit down with, or if she's going to do an interview. She did an entire infomercial essentially with Oprah Winfrey, and yes, no doubt about it, that was in the bag. It was a puff piece, easy interviews. I'm sure the Stephanie Ruhle thing will be maybe not as easy as the Oprah sit-down was, but it's not going to be nearly as tough as it would be if she went on with, I don't know, Brian Kilmeade or somebody over at Fox News. But Donald Trump's not doing those either. And he's not getting any flack for that. None. Who's he sat down with that gives him tough questions and really puts the screws to him about all that he's promising now while he's running for president? Or, here's an idea, his first presidency. We seem to forget, by the way, that he was president of the United States for 4 years. And I ask this all the time when he makes these crazy, out-of-nowhere promises. I like the idea of not taxing tips for servers. I happen to think, by the way, let's be smart about this. Maybe that should be no tips on servers up to, I don't know, $250,000. Because I'm going to tell you something. If you give the hardworking folks who work in the service industry an opportunity to eschew paying, taxes on tips, I guarantee you hedge fund millionaires are going to somehow figure out a way to make sure that their entire income is nothing but tips. Promise you. Anyway, my point about that and with taxes on Social Security, if that's true, if that's what Donald Trump wants to do, why didn't he do it the first time? I mean, isn't that what we've been hearing on the campaign trail? Well, she wants to solve all these problems. She's been vice president for 3.5. Yeah, okay, absolutely. That's a valid question. Then again, she's only been the vice president for 3.5 years. And when you give the proper answer to why some of the wish list of items she and or Biden couldn't accomplish, the cogent response is, the learned response is, well, yeah, but she doesn't have the House of Representatives at her back. The opposition party controls the House of Representatives. We have famously watched as that party with its super slim majority has failed and flailed to do much of anything. How many House speakers have they gone through? I mean, who can work with that? Hell, a lot of their own party can't even work with the House of Representatives, for crying out loud. No, I mean, that's the cogent response. Well, yes, but we have a super slim majority in the Senate. And by the way, it's 50-50. It's not even a majority. It's 50-50 with the vice president being the tie-breaking vote. So with a barely slim, again, a 50-50 tie in the Senate with that and the House that the party doesn't have, and a Supreme Court that has been baked in for now many years with a 6-3 conservative majority. Explain to me how the Biden-Harris administration got anything done. They should be praised for getting anything done. Anyhow, there's this amnesia that we need to be reminded, I guess, as Americans. You know, he was president once before, right? As a matter of fact, in The Atlantic, someone finally wrote this. The headline from David A. Graham: Trump was president once, and it was a total failure even by the standards he set for himself. I love this. This is exactly what needed to be written. And it just came out this morning. I'll have it in the show notes at ronchoatl.com. David writes, Donald Trump's best line in the September debate against Vice President Kamala Harris came near the end when he sought to tie her to the unpopular president under whom she served.
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it?
The only problem, David A. Graham writes, with this attack is that it applies to another unpopular president as well, Trump himself. Time and again during the 2024 campaign, Graham writes, he's promised to do something that he failed to do in his first term, that he didn't bother to do during his first term, or is the opposite of what he did during his first term. Whenever he makes these claims, it's worth remembering that Trump was president once, a fact he seems to hope you'll forget. Maybe he doesn't remember himself. Now, back to Bret Stephens, who was skewered by Stephanie Ruhle on Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. He wrote an op-ed that, again, asks openly, what is Kamala Harris going to do to answer to skeptics? And at this point, you have to just wonder, if Bret Stephens, who is a smart man, he writes for the New York Times, that's kind of your clue. If he's waffling, you think there's any wonder why the rest of us have anxiety over what the common man, what the American voter is going to do in less than 50 days? Whew. He writes, what does Kamala Harris think the United States should do about the Houthis? Most people don't even know how to spell Houthis. He asked that question, and then he goes, whose assaults on commercial shipping threatens global trade and whose attacks on Israel risk a much wider Mideast war? I mean, we're seeing this play out with Hezbollah and Lebanon and Israel right now, too. And I have to think that the vice president is up to speed on what's happening because she's the vice president of the United States, Brett. But I digress. If an interviewer were to ask the vice president about them, would she be able to give a coherent and compelling answer? Okay, that's a fair question, except this is an unfair race because Donald Trump doesn't get asked these questions either. He goes on to write a few more questions. If, as president, she had intelligence that Iran was on the cusp of assembling a nuclear weapon, would she use force to stop it? Are there limits to American support for Ukraine, and what are they? Would she push for the creation of a Palestinian state if Hamas remained a potent political force within it? We heard that brought up during the conversation on Real Time with Bill Maher. Are there any regulations she'd like to get rid of in her initiative to build 3 million new homes in the next 4 years? Here's a lot of the problem with some of these nitpicky questions, and I don't disagree that it would be nice if we had a binary or maybe even 3 or 4 options running for president. You know me, I would prefer that we had multiple political parties ask these substantive questions and got substantive answers. The problem is we don't have these forums where these substantive questions get answered. Also, she's running against a man who literally just, when asked about childcare is childcare. Why is he not being held to the same standards? And if Bret Stephens, who has said, by the way, he's not going to vote for Donald Trump, does hold him to that standards, Bret Stephens is an opinion writer for the New York Times. He knows, by the way, that the president of the United States can't just willy-nilly enact policy, that these have to be hashed out in Congress before they even reach the Oval Office desk for a president to sign. And that the president can weigh in on the conversation from the bully pulpit, but isn't actually going into the halls of Congress and working on the intricacies of those bills. Brett continues in his op-ed, it may be that Harris has thoughtful answers to these sorts of questions. If so, she isn't letting on. She did well in debate with Donald Trump, showing poise and intelligence against a buffoonish opponent. Okay, at least he acknowledges that. But her answers in 2 sit-down interviews, first with CNN's Dana Bash, I agree. I wasn't, if you listen to me after that interview, I wasn't exactly singing her praises, or Tim Walz either. And then with Brian Taff at 6ABC in Philadelphia. He says that her answers were lighter than air. Asked what she'd do to bring down prices, she talked at length about growing up middle class among people who were proud of their lawns before pivoting to vague plans, he writes, to support small business and create more housing. Mr. Stevens, I hate to tell you this, but actually supporting small business is partially how you bring down prices. Competition brings down prices. Do you know that like most of America's grocery stores now, I mean, the overwhelming majority are owned by large chains now. Competition brings down prices, but the grocery prices we're all complaining about, those decisions are being made by just a handful of people. And I would say less than a dozen, less than half a dozen, really. When it comes right down to it, we don't have but so many. I live in the largest city in the state of Georgia, the enterprise state of the South and its capital city. And my options are Kroger, Publix, if I can find a Trader Joe's, a parking spot in a Trader Joe's, a Sprouts, an Aldi out in the suburbs, maybe. And if I drive about 45 minutes outside of town, I might be able to find an Ingles. On the whole, we can throw in Walmart and Target. Target not as much as Walmart, but they are grocery options, and I guess Amazon. And by the way, not all markets even have that. You go out into the rural areas of the state of Georgia, and your options are maybe an Ingles, maybe a Food Lion. Is Bilo still around? And, oh God, Dollar General or an IGA. And I would also invite Brett Stevens at the New York Times to read David A. Graham's piece in The Atlantic and recall that, okay, of the two, one has been president for an entire 4-year term, and we know what happened to the economy under his tutelage and foreign policy. And we also know what has happened with Kamala Harris just as vice president, not even as president. She didn't have the keys to the car. She was in the passenger seat. We know that there are records for both of them to run on. And when you want to nitpick about economic policy, well, the economy is in pretty good shape as the Biden administration is set to leave here pretty soon. And the inflationary issues and the supply chain problems and the cost of goods and services that became a problem under their presidency because of the dumpster fire that they inherited when they walked in is now under control. I'm just questioning Brett and reminding everyone through David A. Graham's writing here, have you forgotten the Trump presidency? Never mind all that you learned in grade school civics about what the president can and cannot do unilaterally. Get a hold of yourself, man. Or as Bill Maher said Friday night to Brett Stevens in person.
I just don't understand how you get to this place, but okay, let's not badger.
I think I mentioned, by the way, that write-in Democratic congressional candidate Tracy Verhoeven is going to join me tomorrow, as is, I believe, senior editor at Lawfare Anna Bauer. She wrote an opinion piece here a few days ago that sort of tries to set our minds at ease. Georgia's new election rules, and will they allow Trump to steal the presidency? She wrote a pretty thoughtful piece that says, relax. We'll go over that a little bit tomorrow and hopefully relax. Here's something I'm not going to relax about, though. I'm going to let you behind the curtain here a little bit. I got stopped about a month and a half ago, I want to say, from an Atlanta Police Department squad car. Man said I ran a red light. Gentleman pulled me over, gave me a ticket. I tried to explain to him, I don't think you can see from your vantage point at the intersection at Mount Vernon and First Avenue in Southwest Atlanta, where the stop sign actually is back away and kind of around the corner of this intersection. There's a line and then there's a stop sign, and it's a good distance from the actual intersection itself, which the city needs to deal with, by the way. That can cause an accident. I went to deal with this ticket. It's really the principal at this point. I think it's a $100 ticket. Here's the problem. I've gone twice now to fight this stop sign violation given to me. It's a mistake. It's an honest mistake. I'm just there to rationalize with a judge and get this, taken care of. I don't want points on my record, yada, yada, yada. I'm having to pay each time I go down to the Atlanta Police Courthouse, and I have to pay $15 to park each time. There is no free public parking anywhere around this place, by the way. So I've gone twice. That's $30. And as of Monday, my bench trial for this has been set for November, where, again, I'll pay $15 to park to fight a ticket I know I'm in the right to defend myself against. I kept wondering, if I couldn't afford all of this, I might cave and just pay for their pretrial intervention, which is like $85 to waive it all. But that's theft, too, because I didn't run the stop sign. If I beat the rap, we know how that usually goes in traffic court, you best believe they were not going to reimburse me for the parking tab either. And it got me to thinking, poor people cannot afford this. They have to choose A, pay the fine, B, succumb to the $85 PTIT to save $15 they're already spending to park, or C, fight and win and still be out $30 to $45 as APD reschedules for the officer to show up when convenient to him or her when they wrote the damn ticket in the first place. There is no $0 fight and win when you're not guilty option, and that's wrong. Representative Ruwa Romman from the Georgia House up next. Maybe I can help her draft some legislation to get this taken care of. I don't know. We'll find out next.
Want to be on the show? Have a cause or campaign you'd like to speak up for? Email Ron at ronshowatl.com or call 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So the good news is she and I have been talking for like 10 minutes, and we had a great segment rolling, and for some reason, my software just froze up. But Representative Ruwa Romman is kind enough to give me the time I need to have her on my show today. And the guy who was cutting the grass 7 stories below my balcony is done anyway, so you're not going to listen to that. Representative Ruwa Romman, thank you for joining the Ron Show today. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I am doing okay. Just, making it through the Wednesday. Week is halfway over. We've got 4 days left until Election Day. And, sorry you're dealing with some frustrations, but, hope it turns up for the rest of the day.
Well, and you're such a bright and personable person that it's already going to put me in a good mood. Plus, I'm cat sitting for my neighbor, so I get to go see the cats in a couple of minutes, and I'm on top of the world. Are you kidding me? So it wasn't all that long ago that you were thrust into the national and international, I guess in some respects, spotlight as the potential Palestinian American to stand at the Democratic National Convention and address delegates. It did not come to fruition, but talk to me about finding yourself in the white hot spotlight of national and even international media at that crucial juncture.
Yeah, it was definitely difficult because specifically the fact that as state representatives, we don't have staff, right? So unlike members of Congress, I don't have a comm staffer. I don't have, a scheduler and a chief of staff and all of that. It was basically me on this onslaught. And, to be honest with you, I didn't even know that I was in serious consideration because Uncommitted had been in negotiations with the DNC for 2 months. And the DNC kept saying, well, the fact that it's not a no is a good sign. Keep sending us names, keep sending us names. And obviously there's only, 5 elected officials on a legislative level. So, Iman Jude in Colorado, Abdel Nasser in Illinois, Rashid in Illinois, and Sam Rasool in Virginia, myself in Georgia, and then obviously Rashida Tlaib up in Virginia. So it's 5 of us, right? And I wasn't even there for the DNC. I was there for a completely different panel with Arab American Institute. So I didn't have credentials. And again, it was so overwhelming. Obviously we all did the best that we could to get to sort of bridge that gap between the party and the voters. Definitely trauma bonded with a lot of people, a lot of amazing people that I'm really excited to keep working with. And at the end of the day, as disappointing as that week was, and as disappointing as the DNC's decision was, because again, this would have been a symbolic gesture that would have gone such a long way and would have sent such a powerful message that we really are a big tent. But at the same time, it just reminds us of the work that we have to do. And, the fact that our party right now, at least on a national level, isn't meeting its promise. And the reason I make that distinction is even when I was there, right? Even when I was at the DNC, everywhere you looked, there were people wearing kufiyas and little pins and flags, and our base has moved, right? We had Harris delegates recruiting each other to become ceasefire delegates, holding the line, saying, you know what, no more weapons, end this, atrocity. And so much support. I I don't know. I look back on it and I think, okay, obviously it's disappointing. Obviously it was a mistake on the DNC's part. And at the same time, to your point, for a week straight after the DNC, all people wanted to talk about was the speech. But inevitably, we'd end up talking about Gaza. We'd end up talking about Palestinians. We'd end up bringing the issue back to the forefront, which is so hard to do, particularly during election cycles.
Mm-hmm. But that brings up another question. We saw what support we had at the national level with the Democratic Party, but I want to ask you specifically here in Georgia, what sort of support do you get from area Democrats, elected or otherwise, and the state party itself? What is the vibe from them for you?
It was one of those things that, so the sit-in, pushing for my speech, all of that, it was just, all of it was so unplanned that it was really, really hard to rally people because it just all kind of took a life of its own. But to be clear, when I came back, I mean, the people I spoke with, whether it was my colleagues, whether it was, young Democrats of Georgia, you name it, everybody that I spoke with was like, yeah, they're like, by the time I caught up, it was too late, but it was ridiculous. They wouldn't let you speak kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the chaos of the DNC, how quickly this moved, just so much of it made it hard to rally. But again, like I said, even though it made it hard to rally, I know for a fact some people had made phone calls on my behalf, right? I know that some people had vouched for me before I even could get in touch with them. So it was one of those, I kind of wish, like, if there was one thing I could change about it, I wish I knew that was going to happen ahead of time. I wish I knew I would be anywhere near the DNC because I think I would have probably just given certain people a heads up and said, hey, I'm going to need your help here.
Mm-hmm. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, had you gotten on stage or anyone representing Palestinian Americans, I mean, we know how this works. You were going to get a primetime slot. It wasn't going to be like, the 9:30 p.m. slot that everybody was going to be seeing on cable TV.
Exactly.
It was more, I don't want to say insignificant, but more, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's just like a less viewed time slot, right? It would have been a smaller audience.
Just a nod to the plight of the Palestinian people and the cause in and of itself. It would have been, I think, significant if not ceremonial. Does that make sense?
Exactly. But that's the point, right? The point was at least give a symbolic gesture.
Yes. That's exactly.
That's why we
symbolic.
keep
That's well, God. I'm sitting here.
Yeah.
I got like a 1300 on my SAT, and I can't come up with symbolic.
But that's the point, right? Yeah. That's the whole point of that.
Right. We're with Representative Ruwa Romman, one of only a handful of Palestinian Americans even serving in elected office at the state or federal level here in the United States. And tell me, what is the difference in your mind from? And I know the vibe is different. With Joe Biden being atop the ticket and now Kamala Harris being atop the ticket, does she get a little bit more grace or leeway than Biden has because he has been president for 3.5 years and he is the driver of policy when it comes to foreign policy in the Middle East?
Honestly, it depends on who you ask. I'll tell you from a personal perspective that, I was at the DNC. My speech offered an endorsement. It was a very public rejection of that endorsement.
Wow.
And so it's kind of putting me in a very, very tough spot personally because I'm a Palestinian. I'm also an elected Democrat. I was one of the people that did say that Joe Biden needs to step aside because I felt like in addition to his very unpopular Gaza policy, there were a lot of concerns. And look, I know people disagree with this, but uncommitted garnered almost 1 million votes around the country.
Right.
And key swing states additionally. And for me, that I don't know how anyone could have looked at that and thought, oh, that had no bearing on him stepping down. That does not make any logical sense to me. And so I do think that uncommitted had a role to play here. People can spin polls, they can't spin votes. So setting that stage, setting the fact that there was a lot of cautious hope about Harris, but at the same time, we had this issue right now where she's not breaking away from Biden on this. Saying, well, she's the vice president. She can't. Actually, she can. Humphrey did this in 1968, but he did it too late. And I think there are a lot more people cautiously optimistic. I think there are a lot more people that understand, for example, that as vice president, she doesn't get to make, what's what I'm looking for? She doesn't get to make final decisions, all of that kind of stuff. And I don't know. What I told her team was that as much as I wish that every voter would just think strategically and tactily and, go in, weigh their options and leave, people don't do it that way. And they need to see and hear something tangible to at least, consider there's something different. Obviously, and I want to be very, very, very clear here. There is absolutely, truly, and sincerely way more enthusiasm. We have a fighting chance now that we did not have when Joe Biden was at the top of the ticket.
Agreed.
But the key word here is fighting chance.
Right.
And for me, it shouldn't be this close. I think that we are leaving votes on the table by not taking a harder stance on things like Gaza. Specifically because we have polling on this. We have polling that shows that Democrats and independents are more likely to vote for the nominee if they commit to conditioning weapons to Israel. We have the polling on this, and it's actually a net positive. The people who said they were less likely range from 5 to 7%, depending on if you were looking at Georgia, Pennsylvania, or Arizona. So these are voters that are literally saying, I am more likely to vote for this candidate. I am the margin of victory or greater, and I'm willing to vote if I can just hear this commitment.
What do you think the holdup is? Is this more about fear of alienating the Jewish American vote? And honestly, I'm sitting here thinking of Jon Stewart, who was on Monday night on the Daily Show, who is a Jewish American who is very pro ceasefire. Seems to be sympathetic to the Gazan cause, to the Palestinian cause, and I've seen a lot of polling that shows that actually Jewish Americans aren't all that wild with Bibi Netanyahu and Israel's, very militaristic, posture. So, again, I ask: is there something that's in that polling that says, well, if you move in any way towards, removing weapons from, our aid package to Israel, that it's going to somehow alienate a number of votes in the Jewish American camp, that it sort of washes out or moves to the negative? Are you seeing anything that tells you that?
We haven't actually seen polling about it, if there would be anything that is a net negative.
Right.
Because I've been watching the polls that DMFI and others put out, and we have not seen that. We also have polling that shows that, unlike, for example, Muslim, Arab, young, and Black voters, this issue does not rank as high as you would think for the majority of Jewish folks. And I want to be clear, the reason we know that it is a number one issue for the Muslim community is that Joe Biden won the Muslim vote by like 86% to 92%, depending on what poll you look at. Sorry, 94%, depending on what poll you look at, or exit polling you look at. Because, we have to determine people's faith in roundabout ways. So like there's some rounding errors. But my point is that President Biden in 2020 overwhelmingly won the Muslim vote. And I think had only received like 70 or 60% of the Jewish vote. And we are now looking at 60 to 70% of the Muslim vote.
Wow. Yeah.
Minimum, right? That's assuming that all the undecideds and all, there's already 30% that are saying they're going to vote for a third party. That to me is very scary, because in Georgia, there's 100,000 registered Muslim voters, technically 130,000, but to keep the math simple, even at a 55% turnout rate, if 30% of those decide to vote differently than Harris, we've lost 16,500 votes. That's larger than our margin of victory in 2020.
I was going to say, I want to think that's a greater number than 11,780 if my math is right.
Correct. And not only that, you add on allies, you add on people that really, really care about this, young voters, and suddenly it's larger than our 2022 margin of victory.
We're with Representative Ruwa Romman, back with The Ron Show on America One Radio and Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Final few minutes with The Ron Show and Representative Ruwa Romman joining us. So we were talking about leaving votes on the table unnecessarily, and I think the math plays that out. But I think the thing that folks don't seem to want to point out, especially when there's coverage about college campus protests, and those are a lot of Jewish American students that are protesting for ceasefire and for de-weaponizing the aid that goes to Israel. Why is that not pointed out enough?
It goes back to generations, right? The generational divide, you know,
Right.
who has access, who doesn't have access. Right now, the older generation has access to everything, right?
Yeah.
Across the board. It doesn't matter what group you're in. You know, you're the people that have been around the longest. You're the people leading the institutions. You're the people, you know, making these final decisions. And, you know, older people listen to other older people. People listen to those their age. And it's a tale as old as time, unfortunately. And it's easier to dismiss people as, oh, it's just the optimism, naivete of the youth than it is to recognize, yeah, the youth are actually recognizing a moral issue of our time.
What is it that drives you as a Palestinian American serving in the Georgia legislature and a Democrat, a member of the Georgia Democratic Party in general? What is it that keeps you going? Because I have to imagine, and you can tell me if this is true or not, I have to imagine there have been moments when you're like, why am I doing this? Why am I still sticking with this party?
Yeah, for me personally, it depends on the day, right? I mean, forget party, way, way, way back. Back in, I want to say December of 2023, you know, when that awful Israel resolution came to the House floor, we were just dealing with so many terrible things. And I remember I actually wrote a resignation letter. I was done. I was tired. I remember one of the reasons I agreed to run specifically for this office was it was local level. And my grandfather had just passed away, and I knew I couldn't handle leading on this issue. I just miss him, and I've lost 3 of my 4 grandparents now, and it's just a generational trauma that runs really deep. And on those days when when it feels like I've got nothing left, I remind myself, why did I even say yes, right? There are issues that I can work on that I have control over. But honestly, sometimes it's just spite, right? I just don't want to give the opposition the satisfaction of getting free reign in our party. It's that simple because our party is changing. Whether those people like it or not, our party is moving in the right direction. If you look at congressional vote counts, Democrats consistently vote against more weapons to Israel at an increasing rate over time. Democrats consistently do things like refuse to attend Netanyahu's speech. The majority of them refuse to attend Netanyahu's speech. There is so much that is happening there that I just don't know why you would move away. And again, to be clear, parties as a whole, especially the duopoly, as people call it, it exists because it's thousands of institutions on a state, county, city, you name it level, including federal. These are mostly volunteers. And when I see that the volunteers are in agreement, when I see the volunteers take on an opinion, that's when I know that party policy is going to eventually change. The DNC is always the last to change. It is always the last to change. And what I tell folks is if I'm seeing this support in our party and it's a vehicle, why would I give up on that? Right?
Yeah.
And not only that, our party is technically a bunch of parties, right? You've got DSA,
Right.
you've got Working Families Party, you've got the Independents. I don't see how we can ignore that. So
I call it cat herding because because there are disparate factions within the Democratic Party that are all going their own different way, and sometimes you're trying to move them in the same direction. It's not easy. It's not easy at all, and that's why I try to stay close to you and stay in your ear because I'm genuinely curious from time to time. Listen, as a gay man who went through the 80s and 90s with the just wait, we'll be there for you when the time is right. It's been there for decades. I kind of feel like I have a tiny sense of what it is that you're going through, minus, of course, the immense grief and sorrow and death and war. But that's why I kind of stay, I hope to stay on your radar a little bit because I'm genuinely curious and I just felt like it was an important question to ask. Like, are there days, and I'm glad to hear you be very honest about this. Are there days where you just are like, why am I doing this? But I also want to ask you, Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, John Kennedy, just excoriated, just was as Islamophobic as could openly possibly be with the Arab American Institute Executive Director Maya Berry.
You support Hamas, do you not?
Wow.
Senator, oddly enough, I'm going to say thank you for that question because it demonstrates the purpose of our hearing today in a very
Let's start
effective
first
way.
with a yes or no.
Hamas is a foreign terrorist organization that I do not support, but you asking the executive director of the Arab American Institute that question very much puts the focus on the issue of hate in our country.
Well, I got your answer, and I appreciate it. What is the you support Hezbollah too, don't you?
Again, I find this line of questioning extraordinarily disappointing,
Is that a
Senator.
no?
That
Or
you have
yes?
you have Arab American constituents that you represent
is
in
that
your great state.
Yes, ma'am, I understand that, but my time's limited, and I apologize, but is that a yes or a no?
Yes or no question to do I support Hezbollah? The answer is I don't support violence, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, or any other entity that invokes
You
it.
can't
So
bring
no,
yourself
sir.
to say no, can you?
No, I can say no. I can say yes.
But
What
you
I can
haven't.
say is
You just
your
can't
line
make
of
yourself do
questioning.
it. Do you
Senator.
support or oppose Iran and their hatred of Jews?
Again, I'm going to emphasize Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, none of them is going to, this
you
discussion.
can't bring yourself to say no, can
Sir,
you?
I don't support.
It's real simple.
Excuse me. I'm going to,
Ian,
if I may, as a Muslim woman, sir, I'm going to tell you I do not support Iran. But what I will tell you is that this conversation.
I'm running out of time. I'm sorry.
She answered you.
You called our decision to cut funding. You called our decision to cut fund. Well, first, what's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency?
It's UNRWA, which is the institution that exists to provide services and aid to the nearly 6 million Palestinian refugees.
And you called our decision to cut funding for them, quote, an incredible moral failure, close quote.
That is absolutely correct. But again, I would suggest that conversation
And
is about foreign policy.
We did that because 9 UNRWA staff members were fired for actually helping Hamas on October 7th. Isn't that the case?
I don't believe that that's correct in terms
Let
of...
me ask you one more time. You support Hamas, don't you?
Wow.
You
Sir.
support UNRWA and Hamas, don't you?
Sir,
Please.
I think it's exceptionally disappointing that you're looking at an Arab American witness before you and saying you support Hamas.
You know what's disappointing to me?
I do not support
you can't
Hamas.
Bring yourself
I do
to
not
say
support Hamas
You don't
or
support UNRWA. You don't support Hamas. You don't.
I was very clear in my support for UNRWA.
Hezbollah, and you don't support Iran. You should hide your head in a bag.
I can't help but wonder when I saw that screed, seeing that from the opposition party, does that also keep you fighting hard and saying, you know what, the Democratic Party ain't perfect, but it ain't that?
You know, unfortunately, racism is systemic and it's everywhere, right? Even within, I know it's hard to believe, but even within our own party, we've got folks who can be very racist.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean when saying systemic. And when it comes to anti-Palestinian and anti-Arab racism, which is what Kennedy specifically was in addition to being Islamophobic, those things still seem to be the most acceptable form of hatred across the board.
Right.
You know, don't forget, you've got folks like Richie Torres continuing to tweet out the worst things, right? You have the Democratic Attorney General in Michigan, who, by the way, I didn't even know was Jewish, right? I didn't even know she was Jewish until she started saying that Rashida was attacking her for being Jewish. None of us knew. I didn't know she was Jewish, right? All I knew is that she went after a bunch of college kids. She failed to prosecute the folks responsible for the Flint water crisis. That's what I knew about her. I had no idea about her identity, none of that. You know, whether it's the cartoon about Rashida, whether it's this incident with Kennedy, whether it's frankly a rejection of any Palestinian speaker at the DNC, whether it's the way that we continue to talk about Palestinians, Muslims, Arabs, you name it, this seems to be one of those things that is still commonly accepted, and it is very unfortunate. And it's a degree of how visceral it is that is the difference, right?
Yeah.
With Kennedy, it was very visceral and very intense. You know, with others, maybe not so much, or like at least more muted or more covered, but it's still there. And I think it's on us. And again, like I said, we are the party where people work to desegregate the country, right? We're the party that worked to pass the Civil Rights Act. As imperfect as we are as a party, we have been a vehicle for legislative priorities like that. I was very, very, very heartened to see people condemning him, particularly Democrats on a federal level. I was heartened when I saw that the House Democratic Caucus on a federal level had condemned the cartoon about Rashida. So I think my hope, and I think that as our party continues to educate itself, we're going to start to see more of that.
So I only have a couple more minutes with you here, but I want to ask you and your volunteers, and I keep seeing a lot of your social media posts, a lot of happy, smiling faces. Going door to door is a beating, though. Phone banking is a beating. How do you keep smiles on those faces?
I have such a kind district. I don't know how else to describe it, right? When people ask me, like, how would you describe your district? I would say we have a very kind district.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is we have such a high open door rate. Usually it's around 10, 15%.
Uh-huh.
We've hit almost 30% open door rates.
Huh.
People are kind. They will open their doors. They will talk to you, even if they're busy. Like the way they shoo you away is so nice. And so
even when they shoo you away, they're nice.
I mean, seriously, we've knocked over 4,000 doors and have had maybe 2 or 3 people be negative, if that.
Okay.
If that.
Wow.
Right? At a
Wow.
30% turnout rate, that's over 1,000 people.
Mm.
You know, we've had volunteers that are coming every weekend. We try to make it fun. I just, that's what keeps me going. I have such a good district. It is my district. It is my people that keep me going. It is my loved ones, you know, my spouse who's been very supportive. I mean, it's just, you know, sometimes it's just spending some time petting my sweet pets. I just, and like I said, sometimes it's spite, you know, but I'm never going to let anybody see me break. I'm not like one of those people that emotes a lot in public. Like I don't really cry in public.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a photo of me from the DNC. And even though, and you know, I was like talking about my grandfather, like I said, this is hard for me because I miss him.
Yeah.
And even with like tears in my eyes, my head was like held high, right? It's going to take way more than whatever this is to break me. And even then, I don't think it will, because at the end of the day, it's just one of those things where I'm never giving my opposition the satisfaction. They're never going to get it. They can keep trying. It's never going to happen. That's just how it's going to go.
I appreciate you so much. You have absolutely no idea. I want to thank you for giving me a few minutes. In fact, she gave me more than a few minutes because, again, my software crashed and we had this whole rant about paying to park at the courthouse for my traffic ticket. And I was trying to tell her, like, write a bill. We need to get this reimbursed. I think you would win in a landslide and probably even be able to see state elective office if you were to push some legislation like that. But we can always talk about that some other time. I'll let you know how this goes once I do go to court in November. Representative Ruwa Romman, thank you so much for time and thank you for joining the Ron Show today.
Of course, truly. And thank you for everything. Always love chatting and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You do the same, man. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That'll do it. Show notes at ronshowatl.com. Back tomorrow. Have a great day.